welcome to another video, Purple Political Talk here, and today we're going to be looking at the August 4th primaries in the 2020 congressional elections. So we had primaries in a couple states, including Arizona, Michigan, Missouri, Washington, for these congressional races. So we're going to look at what ended up happening, what currently is going on, and what does this mean for the general elections in a lot of these places. So we're going to start off with the state of Arizona. We saw that in the Arizona Senate primary, Martha McSally is the projected winner. She won the race. Again, I mean, it's not as an astonishing margin, considering that Daniel McCarthy wasn't. He's not an established politician in the state of Arizona. So I mean, him getting 25% of the vote is pretty good, and that kind of just gives bad signs for McSally, considering that she's not that popular in the state of Arizona. And yeah, so I mean, 77% when she's the current incumbent against a not-so-known politician in the state of Arizona. Not a good look for McSally. When it comes to the House races, so Tom O'Halloran's primary is still going on. So these two seats, I'm guessing that not all precincts are reporting. And, I mean, right now, the race is pretty close. I mean, for, like, primary-wise, I mean, it looks like, I mean, the opponent had a chance to flip the seat or actually unseat Tom O'Halloran. But I think at this point in time, Tom O'Halloran should be fine. And when it comes to the Republican primary, they're still fighting it out for who gets to go against Tom O'Halloran or Eva Putsova. When it comes to House, so I mean, it's the same thing. It's Ann Kirkpatrick's seat. The Democratic primary, the Republican primary is actually still going on. Again, I'm guessing that not all precincts are reporting. The seat is going to be close somewhat because Ann Kirkpatrick, I mean, her district is somewhat conservative, but she's well-liked. So when it comes to general election, I think nothing should change. Paul Gosar won his primary in the fourth congressional district, as well as Delina DeSanto. So she's going against Paul Gosar, but I think she has barely any chance anyways, considering this is a solid Republican district. When it comes to 5th District, there's only Democratic primary because, again, this is a Republican-held seat, and the Republican had, I think, no opponents. So it's currently somewhat tight for primary standards, but Joanne Green is currently in the lead. In the House 6, for the Democrats, they already called their nominee. It would be Hiral Tipnerny. Sorry about that. And she got a pretty good chunk of votes. She won by a decisive margin. And I think that's one of the big things we were seeing with a lot of these House primaries. 8th District, we can see here. Michael Muscato, he won that primary. David Gills, for the 9th primary. And the Maricopa County Sheriff, it's still going on. It's a very close race at this point. Very interesting race in the state of Arizona. And if Jerry Sheridan wins, that's going to be a big blow for Joe Arpaio. Right now, they're on less than around 80. They're less than 80, or no, actually less than 500 votes away from each other. It's a less than 1% margin for this race. So I mean, at this point, these two candidates are pretty much out. And I mean, Joe Arpaio, he's very infamous for being a very bad sheriff in Maricopa County. So I mean, no wonder that he's kind of losing already. But then Sherry Sheridan right now is actually in the lead, so that's going to be a race to watch. When it comes to Kansas, this is the race a lot of people were looking at. So out of the Kansas Senate Republican primary, and look at this, Roger Marshall won. I mean, everyone was betting on Chris Kobach, and I guess a lot of the Democrats, they really wanted Chris Kobach so Barbara Bolliard could win the seat. And I think when it comes to this race, a couple things ended up happening. First of all, Bob Hamilton overperformed where he was expected to. I mean, I think everyone was thinking, oh, Bob Hamilton, I mean, yeah, he'll maybe get 10% of the vote. I think he overperformed everyone's expectations, and a lot of people thought, well, Bob Hamilton, conservative, he's going to split vote with Roger Marshall instead of Chris Kobach because they're a little bit more establishment. That did not end up happening. And essentially, that's going to hurt Chris Kobach at the end of the day. And that's not good for him. And I mean, as of right now, I mean, this is the best case for Republicans in Kansas. The Republican committee in Kansas, the Republican chair, and kind of all the head of Republicans in Kansas, they absolutely did not want Chris Kobach to run. It ended up working up for them. And Barbara Bolliard's chances at the Senate are near to none at this point. just because Roger Marshall won. Is the race going to be contested just because there is somewhat of an excitement for her? Yeah, but is it going to be as close as it would have been with Chris Kobach? Probably not. At this point, Barbara Bollier, her chances have gone completely out the window. I mean, any chances that she had at getting elected to the Senate are already gone because essentially her race was just with Chris Kobach. Roger Marshall at this point, or even Bob Hamilton, but Roger Marshall, he kind of pulled off an upset, quote unquote, just in how much he won by. So a lot of people thought if Roger Marshall won, he was going to win only by 2 or 3 points. He did not only win by 2 or 3 points, he won by almost 15, which is pretty insane. So, in that Kansas Senate primary, I mean, everyone was surprised, I would say, and especially how early they called it. It's just that, again, in a very crowded primary, he won 40% of the vote, which is pretty nice. And Barbara Bollier actually got a little bit more of a challenge from Robert Tillman. I mean, it's not something major or anything, but I mean, 15% of the vote, which, I mean, just comparing the vote totals, I mean, the Republicans just have more in Kansas, if you combine the top 2 candidates, than the other 2 candidates, that's not a good look, and then you also had, like, a ton more. So, I mean, this race would have been close, but I mean, Barbara Bollier completely lost the race already, I would say, just because of Chris Kobach losing. Then we have a lot of these primaries where, so this is Roger Marshall's old seat, so it's pretty likely at this point that Tracy Mann will go on to be the next representative from Kansas' 1st Congressional District. Here, this race is pretty interesting because Jake LaTurner actually beat incumbent Steve Watkins. That is our first unseating of the night. I mean, Steve Watkins lost his race, I guess, at this point. So Jake LaTurner will probably go on to serve for Kansas' 2nd Congressional District. And at this point in time, it's simply because of how the race ended up working out. And I think Steve Watkins, if I'm correct, he had some campaign fraud or something like that, or voter fraud scandal that he lost the primary because of that. So, I mean, Steve Watkins lost already, and Jake LaTurner actually did pretty good, and he upset him by a somewhat large margin of 15%, and he's going to be going against Michelle De La Isla. And Kansas' 3rd Congressional District, that's the last primary that we have, because I think there's one more Congressional District, if I'm correct. Amanda Akins won for the Republicans. And yeah, so those are all our Kansas results. And let's go on to the state of Michigan. So there's a lot for the state of Michigan. So essentially, there's some retiring incumbents. I mean, I'm guessing Michigan's 1st district, if I'm correct. I think that was Justin Amash's old seat. So right now, I mean, here the Republican Party got or because actually there's no primary for the Republicans, but just going through these seats, I mean, the winners of these primaries won somewhat decisively. I mean, there was very few close primaries, essentially those that were not called at this point. And I mean, most of these incumbents, I mean, they didn't face many challenges in the state of Michigan. Although in Michigan's 10th Congressional District, it was somewhat of a close race. It still has not been called. And I mean, it's still Debbie Dingell won her primary. David Huffonder. So at this point, yeah, he won his primary. And then at this point, this was going to be a big primary of the night. Everyone thought maybe Rashida Tlaib is going to get unseated. That was not the case. Rashida Tlaib actually won her primary by a decisive margin of almost 30%. So she got kind of renominated. 14th, Brenda Lawrence. Again, she got renominated by a quite substantial margin. And that's a state of Michigan. I mean, nothing too interesting. I mean, none of the primaries were super important. I would say the most interesting was definitely Rashida Tlaib's primary in the state of Michigan. And when it comes to the governor's race in the state of Missouri, we also have that. So we're going to go on to the state of Missouri. So Nicole Galloway easily won that primary. I mean, she essentially won by a margin of what? Almost 78%, which is pretty big margin. And I mean, she is the best candidate to go on to beat Mike Parsons, incumbent governor. When it comes to vote totals, I mean, she's a little bit in trouble because if you add all of these votes, I mean, so that's essentially 60,000 votes more. That's Mike Parsons. You have to essentially just catching up to Mike Parsons, and then she would have to flip all of this other votes. So Nicole Galloway, I mean, she's going to be a good candidate for Missouri governor. Now, is she going to win? Probably not. When it comes to the Medicare expansion, they passed that. What else? The House district. So interesting. So Missouri's 1st Congressional District, Cory Bush actually beat current incumbent. So this was another big unseating of the night. I mean, she was the Bernie-backed candidate, and she's a progressive in, I think, if I'm correct, St. Louis is essentially, this is St. Louis district. So Missouri House is St. Louis. So she beat Lacey Clay, and at this point, Cori Bush. I mean, that shows progressive movement is moving somewhat quite rather fast in Missouri's first congressional district. Everything else is pretty normal. I mean, the incumbents won their primaries. Emmanuel Cleaver, some names that you probably would know from the House of Representatives. Most of them won their primaries. And Washington, I mean, we're still getting some results because they closed their polls somewhat later, but I think we have most of them in. So the weird thing about Washington is that they do their primaries in open primaries. So, I mean, whoever runs, and then the top two candidates go on. So, for example, here, Jay Inslee and Lauren Culp won the primary. Jay Inslee won easily. I mean, he won by over 400,000 votes. He should be able to retain his governor seat. Susan Dubleen, I mean, for House, it's going to be the incumbent against a challenger that only got 20% of the vote. So, I mean, when it comes to these open primaries, we're going to get somewhat of a feel of what the general election is going to be looking like. This race has not been called yet. I think essentially just because these two, so Rick Larson already won a renomination, but it's a very close race between actually second and third, I would say. Second, third, and fourth, I would say at this time. And in this primary in House 3, the current incumbent actually won. I don't know why they have it like that. It looks weird, but Jamie Era Butler, he or she ended up winning the primary. Their incumbent. I mean, pretty normal. I mean, all incumbents got renominated. And here, for example, Pramila Jayapal, I mean, she was pretty popular last week just because of their tech hearings. But I mean, essentially, it's a race right now. They're just looking for who's going to be second place, and everything else looks just pretty much in norm and for it looks okay. So I mean, generally speaking, these primaries were nothing exceptional. I mean, there were some interesting primaries though, and I think the three biggest takeaways of the night were: one, Cori Bush beating 10-term incumbent Lacey Clay, and actually a 52-year political dynasty because his father held the seat. Then you had Chris Kobach lose the primary, which is a huge blow for the Democrats in the state of Kansas. I mean, at this point, it's not looking too good for them. Jake LaTurner beat Steve Watkins in the primary, and we know who's going to take over Roger Marshall's old seat. All these different things. Race to watch, so it's still not been called the Maricopa County Sheriff. I mean, is this a super substantial race? Probably not. However, it's something to watch because whoever is the next Maricopa County Sheriff is going to have somewhat power when it comes to border security and stuff like that. Like we've seen Joe Arpaio have right now. So, I mean, he's losing his primary right now, though, but it's within a margin of like 700 votes or 500 votes, which is ridiculous when it comes to a race like that. And other than that, everything else is pretty much in form. Everything is pretty much normal, I would say, except those couple of races that I said. I mean, for the rest, I mean, these primaries were they're not that exciting. However, I mean, Martha McSally won, so we know it's definitely going to be Martha McSally at this point against Mark Kelly. We also know what I said about the first district in Missouri with Cori Bush, and we know about the Senate race in Kansas, which is pretty much already out of reach for the Democrats just because Roger Marshall won. So, I mean, this was an interesting night for election results because, I mean, it wasn't as close in some of the races. I mean, the closest race is definitely for the GLB primary is definitely the sheriff in Maricopa County, which is interesting because that's not even a statewide race, it's a county-wide race. So, I mean, that's going to be interesting. So, I hope you enjoyed the video. If so, please give it a huge thumbs up, like and subscribe, and turn on post notifications to get notified when I post my next video. I hope you enjoyed the video, and goodbye.